I let them do what they were hired to do. And so I go to my nursing department, I go to my medical department, I go to my clinical department, and I say, we're going to break down everything that we do, and we're going to put a process behind it, because ultimately we're working with individuals' lives, and we have to eliminate the waste.
Welcome back to the CEO Moves. Today we are here with Adam Tucker, Chief Executive Officer of Addiction Treatment Center of New England and former addiction specialist for the White House, the actual White House. There's lots of stories there I want to get into, but Adam, this is our first foray into healthcare from a healthcare for addicts sort of bent. I find a lot of great stories, I think, here and ways to relate to leadership and emotional intelligence and running a thriving business. Let's see where this takes us. But thank you very much for coming today. And I'd like to welcome Adam Tucker to the CEO Moves.
Yeah, thanks, Kurt. Great for having me.
So, Adam, noticed here on your profile, you've been chief of the Addiction Center since 2022, so almost a little over 3 years now. Prior to that, you were tapped to be the addiction specialist for the White House, and you're not sure who referred you in, but you must have been doing something right to get that top level clearance, that kind of a job. Can you tell us a little bit about that experience and how that led you to maybe to the current one?
Yeah, sure. So at the time I got recommended for the position, I was working in Northern Virginia, up in the DC area as a clinical director for a treatment program. And up in the DC area, you've got a lot of folks that in some way or another have their foot into the federal government. So I speculate that somebody I worked with referred me, and one thing led to the next. But yeah, so I was the addiction specialist for the White House, and really what they wanted somebody that had a lot of experience working in substance use disorder treatment with multiple levels of care. And so over my period of time, I started as a counselor and have worked really, you name the level of care, I've had my foot in it. And so they brought me in to advise the executive office of the president. I worked for the Office of National Drug Control Policy, so a policy organization. And they wanted somebody that could come in and advise on federal level addiction policy. So started with the Trump administration, the previous Trump administration, and then helped transition in the Biden administration. Really out of this world kind of experience. I was there during COVID. And then, obviously we know the political climate during that time. So a really unique experience. One, to work for the government, two, to be there during that time. So it was, it was the opportunity of a lifetime that I felt like I couldn't pass up on.
How did that lead you here? How did you get tapped to this current role at the Addiction Treatment Center?
Sure. Yeah. So, like I said, I mean, the SUD addiction world is the only world that I've ever worked in. I started as a counselor and just kind of climbed the ranks. Whether it be at director level positions or even over multi-site positions as a division director in certain places. So it was a contracted position with the government. And once I finished that contract, I wanted to get back into the treatment world. Like, policy is great, right? And I understand policy is applicable to what I do, but analyzing 300-400 page documents for certain verbiage, that's not me. That's not my forte. I like to get my hands dirty. And so I was looking around. My wife is originally up from the Boston area, and saw the Addiction Treatment Center in New England, and saw that they'd been a tenured agency for a pretty decent amount of time. The agency's almost 45 years at this point. And so I threw my name in the hat, and they called my name and came up and got to meet the board of directors and some of my staff, my current staff, and really just saw that they had a pretty well-oiled machine, and were looking to do some expansion and some growth, which I was interested in that point in my career, and decided this was a fit, and let's take this ship to Massachusetts.
You're a very hands-on person. From what you just said, analyzing policy was not going to be something you're going to do long-term or even short-term, right?
Yeah.
So I kind of want to switch gears now and talk a little bit about medicine and treatment, because I'm fascinated by addiction. Lucky enough not to be an addict, because I know how difficult it can be. I've been around addicts, but tell me about, in your words or in your mind, the best treatment for addiction that you can provide.
Yeah. I mean, what a loaded question. And I could probably ask you a ton of questions back to really get super specific on that. But so here's the deal. Regardless of the substance of choice for an individual, or regardless of their time in treatment, you've got folks that have been, it's their first time in treatment, or maybe their 20th or 30th time in treatment. It really comes down to one, meeting the client where they're at, and really truly giving that person what they call in our world client-centered care, right? So over the years, addiction treatment has been, and this is not a knock on it. I think this is just kind of how it's developed over time. It's been, you kind of have multiple boxes, and we come in, we do an assessment on you, and we put you in a box, right? Like you fit the co-occurring box, which means that you've got a substance use disorder and a mental health condition, or we throw you in a young adult box, right? You're between 18 and 25, and we decide that this is the model that you're going to get. And I could name a bunch of boxes, but you get the gist of what I'm saying. And
Yep.
now where I think quality addiction treatment comes, what it is, you come through the door, and we really assess where you're at in your cycle of recovery, and we treat you for who you are, what your experiences are, what the supports are around you. And even more so, which this never would have happened back in the day, is we let you have say so in what your treatment looks like. And kind of the method to the madness behind that is back in the day, you could come through and I'd say, this is what you're going to get. This is what's going to, heal you. Right. And maybe you had buy-in, maybe you didn't. Now we solicit, like, what do you want this to look like? What's your buy-in on it? They have some input on their treatment model, and you initially get buy-in from them, right? Because they're a part of their treatment process. They're a part of what we call a treatment plan in this world.
Love it.
And I think is really, we're not the only people doing this, right? This is all through the addiction treatment world, but I think is the next step in really being able to treat these people, not just for their disease, but for who they are as an individual and as a whole. Because the disease is a portion of what they have to address, and there's a whole other gamut of stuff within their life that has to get tapped into, and they need to be able to have input on that.
Oh my goodness, there's so many different directions we could go with this, but I like to reframe things that I hear and just to confirm what I hear. But what I heard, um, historically, you'd want to have some sort of scientific like process, right, for someone is an addict. All right, well, here's what we've seen in the past. Here's what's worked with others in the past in a similar situation. Here's what science we think tells us will work. Um, but you can't apply that to human beings. In many ways, it's got to be a give and take. It's got to be a respectful process too. And what I thought of when you said you give them a hand in their treatment, or you give them a say in their treatment, that the respect word came top of mind, because you have no idea who you're talking to, right, when they come into that through the doors of a treatment center. And what you do immediately is you say, I respect you, essentially. I want you to work with us and help us figure out the best path forward.
Yeah.
Is that kind
Yeah,
of
I mean, you're
the
hitting the nail on
approach?
the head. Yeah, you're hitting the nail on the head, right? And it's not that we don't remove science, right? There's still there's still evidence-based practices and things that we use. We still rely on what the research tells us. Um, but that's only a piece of it. That's a piece of it, and it's like I said, it's treating the individual for more than just their diagnoses, and
Mm.
that's destigmatizing them as soon as they come through the door, or even prior, right? It starts prior to them getting in the door. They pick up the phone or they meet with a business development rep, and you have to already break that. You have to already break that stigma, that anxiety, that resistance down prior to them even getting through the door. Because if not, they're not coming. And that's the truth of it, which is, it's it's anxiety ridden. It is daunting for these folks to engage in treatment, and so you better be able to treat them with respect and dignity, because if not, you've already set up a barrier for yourself.
Is this what's the lifespan of a treatment? And again, it depends on the person, right? Or it depends on the addiction, I would imagine. But How long are you working with someone that comes through the doors?
Yeah. Yep. So for us, I can speak to us, and I can also speak to other levels of care, and it depends on what level of care they're in, right? So, are they in need of a detox, right? Detox, depending on the substance, is generally a 5 to maybe 7 day treatment, and that's really addressing like the chemical dependency piece of this, right? You have a chemical dependency to some substance, and you need a medical detox to be able to be safe, right? To be safe and to have some level of stability to be able to engage in whatever that next step of treatment is. A lot of times, folks go from detox into what we call just like a residential treatment, and a residential treatment could be anywhere from a month to maybe 2 months. And we could go into like the insurance side of all of that and what they allow, but like what's called your standard 28 days of treatment, and that is really where they've reached a level of stability, and they're going to engage in like a medication management aspect of that. They're going to engage in like a psychiatric evaluation aspect of that. They're certainly going to engage in the clinical side, like the counseling and the therapeutic side of that, where they're able to kind of peel back the layers of how they got to where they're at. And then often they get to like the outpatient level of care, and that's really has been our primary modality of care where we're at the Addiction Treatment Center in New England, and it's an outpatient level of care, and works with like medicated assisted treatment. So we provide medication and outpatient counseling, and folks can be with us. Gosh, I mean, and this is really specific to who this individual is. We have folks that come to us for 3 months, and that's all they need. And we've had folks that have stayed with us for 20 years, right?
Yeah.
And they walk through different levels of stability, during those 20 years. And a lot of times what you find is at this outpatient level of care, we are, we are just one piece of the puzzle that they're addressing at that time. Right. So they may have an outpatient provider like us and, meeting with a doctor and an MP and a therapist and a recovery coach, but they are addressing, they may have sober living that they're living in, which we also have as well. Or they may be working with a psychiatrist outside of there on mental health co-occurring type disorders. So that's a little bit of a snapshot of some of the levels of care and like how
Yeah.
long it can be. But those can all bleed together. So if you're talking about the course of an addiction, just the treatment piece of it, we're talking years.
Tell me a little bit about the team approach to this. You just mentioned a lot of different specialists. You mentioned a recovery coach, a psychiatrist, a therapist, outpatient. I would imagine there's a navigator involved in this whole thing, coordinate all the different types of things. So what does it take to put together a team to help someone that's severely addicted to either drugs, alcohol, and has psychiatric, issues? I would imagine that is an absolute team thing. It's just not just one person that says, yeah, this is what I think we should do.
Yeah, there's not one person driving the ship. So I can give you my approach, and maybe this might bleed us into another subject. Who knows? And I didn't make this up. There's another individual that I've met with before, and really respond to really just how he draws out leadership, but he calls it people, process, and performance. And so the people piece, right? You have an agency, you have a mission and a vision statement, and it's just one of those things that you do, and there maybe people know what it is, but if they do, there's never talk about it. Like it's just this thing that you have to do in order to have a business. And really what this individual has kind of guided me on is like you have to bring people in the door that have a genuine respect and understanding and kind of drive and passion behind what's in that mission and vision, right? And so one, you need to be able to speak to it, and and two, you need to be able to, whether that be through the interview process or the professional development process, you need to be able to take people and have their buy-in on that. And then, until you do that, until you have that in a business, you're going to be unsuccessful. It's not, especially in the world of like addiction treatment, compassion is like, you gotta have it. You gotta have drive. You gotta have passion. And if you don't have that, you're not gonna make it in this world. You're gonna think this world is crazy, and you're gonna get out pretty quick. So you have to hire, recruit, and or professionally develop people in order to have that. So that's the people piece, right? And then it goes into the process piece. And the process piece, this sounds like this really sounds like a CEO thing, right? But I don't mean it that way.
Like a what?
I said this really sounds like a CEO thing, and I don't mean it
Okay.
that way,
All right.
right? Like, and I'll walk you behind it. So this is kind of the piece of what you just asked, which is, I have a nursing department, a medical department, a clinical department, an administrative department, a case management department, a housing department, a finance department, a board of directors, an executive leadership team. So imagine putting all of those brains in the same room and saying, this is Joe Schmo. What are we going to do with him for treatment? You're going to get a ton of different perspectives. And again, if I don't have the right people in the room, they're not going to be able to coexist in those conversations. It's going to cause chaos. It's going to cause communication breakdown. It's going to cause employee issues. So what we've done as an agency is I've gone to, I've got my point people. I'm just the guy that sits up high, and I put the right people in the place, and I let them do what they were hired to do. And so I go to my nursing department, I go to my medical department, I go to my clinical department, and I say, we're going to break down everything that we do, and we're going to put a process behind it, because ultimately we're working with individuals' lives, and we have to eliminate the waste. I got to get rid of it, right? So I don't have time for breakdowns in communication. I don't have time for, like continual processes that are being done differently within a department. Like, we're going to do things the way that they need to be done, because again, our mission and vision statement says this, and this is how we believe they need to be done. So
Yeah.
I had them put it all down on paper, and this is the thing that we continually do every week. And so we put it all down on paper, and then what we do is, let's say my clinical director says we need to work on a process. I don't just have my clinical director in the room. I have everybody in the room as a part of that process, because ultimately that process will affect somebody else's process, which will affect somebody else's process. And ultimately everybody needs to know like how the whole ship comes together.
Yeah.
And the functionality of it, right? Again, because we got the mission and the vision. So
Yep.
mission and vision leads into the process. And it's, again, it sounds very like bossy and like managey, but I can tell you it drives culture. And the reason that it drives culture is because, this world is chaos. It's organized chaos, but it's chaos. And we're dealing with people's lives and all their trauma and everything they come in. And people like to know how to do things. And so when I can go to new hires and say, this is how you do a treatment plan, boom, it takes the guesswork out of it, and they get behind it, and they believe they're working efficiently. And so it really has, I didn't really have to get a whole lot of buy-in. My leadership team bought into it, and then it just trickles down, right? And I think a cool piece of that is depending on whatever the process may be, I also solicit kind of like entry level staff or ground level staff into that, right? Because I'm not doing it. I don't like, I may have done it as a younger professional, but I've never done it here. And so I can't tell you how to do it here. I can just speculate how to do it here. So why don't you tell me how it's working here, and we'll get your buy-in. So it's like a top down, bottom up kind of buy-in in terms of processes.
Mm-hmm.
So that's the second P, and it's really, again, has really helped develop culture for us. And then, the third piece is the performance piece. And I think with that, again, I've got people that are, driven to be in this world, and want to, they want to save lives. That's what they want to do. That's why you don't get into this field unless you want to do that. And so they want to know how they're doing. And I think a huge piece of, whether it be this world or any other, I don't know any other world. This is the only world I know, but I speculate it happens other places, is people want to know how they're doing, both good and bad. And so we solicit weekly formal time for really every employee that I have. We call it supervision in this world, but a piece of that is like a performance evaluation, right? So if you're my supervisor, or if you're my supervisee, Kurt, and I come in every week, whether it be good or bad, and give you feedback on how you're doing, at the end of the year, when I give you your performance review, it's not a shock and awe thing, and you know where you stand. And also at the same time, in that performance piece, if there is something that needs to be addressed, I can be transparent about it, and then I can develop you professionally through that. And then, so the three P's, they repeat, right? Because ultimately, I'm never going to be able to retain all of my employees that I hire. A process is, I'm never going to 100% eliminate all the waste in my processes. And there's always going to be performance issues that need to be addressed. So it just goes like this.
Right.
And so that's kind of my method of the madness, which brings all the departments together and kind of forms that communication piece.
Yeah, you wrap everybody around this. I see how you related team and treatment and team treatment around your vision as a CEO. You know, you can't get away from the whole people process and performance piece, because you do it internally on your own people, and then you do it in, on your patients, right?
Yeah.
On your customers, clients, patients, whatever you want to call them. Really, they're patients. But I really like this. So I'm going to reframe what I heard. The people piece, you have to give people a reason, a reason to come to work, right? And a why behind what you're doing, right? The process piece, people, in many cases, standardization provides confidence, right? Like if you know that there's a process that you can follow that works, you're going to get behind it, you're going to learn it, and you're going to be able to thrive, right? And that drives performance. So the third piece is performance. Uh, what I heard from you too, though, is that feedback is incredibly important and very powerful, and it drives development. So if you're getting feedback early and often, which is what you do, sounds like every week almost, um, at the end of the year, you're going to know that you have a development plan because you're on it. I mean, there's nothing that you haven't been sideswiped or surprised by, hey, I've noticed this recently. You know, no,
Yeah.
you're going to know about it early and often because you're giving weekly feedback. So I really like this process, and I think it's applicable in many ways to almost any business.
Sure. Sure. Yeah, no, we agree, and it's been incredibly effective for us.
Yeah, in where I was going with earlier with the question of treatment, what's the best treatment? I kind of, you talk about chemical treatment, right? You talk about medicine, that we all know the sort of the medicines that are involved in the detox process. Thank God I've never had to go through anything like that, but I've awful things that I've seen on TV, right? When someone's going through a detox, it looks horrifying. But I guess the question is, what's more effective? Attention from a person and a team, or attention from chemicals,
Oh,
or
yeah.
both?
Well, it's got to be both. It's got to be both. Like I said, so if somebody, depending on the substance that we're talking about, until I get you, until I reach a point of stability with you,
Mm-hmm.
um, a team's probably not going to be effective, right? You're just not
Yeah,
stable. You're not stable enough to even have the conversations, right? And that's not a knock on this person. That's just the substance. The
right,
substance has it's consumed at this point, right? And
right.
so I gotta get you to a place of stability before my team can start to work, right? I don't need some level of incredible stability, right? Like you don't have to be, you don't have to you don't have to do anything crazy, but let's flush you out, let's dry you out, right? And
Yeah,
then
right,
I can let my team go to work,
yeah,
and that's really where I believe the magic happens. You can go to detox over and over and over, but that ultimately is not gonna address that's not going to address your disease as a whole. The disease is way larger than just the chemical that you've been using.
okay.
Yeah,
I don't want to go too far into the rabbit hole of addiction and the disease, although that is your business. But where I do want to go now is a little bit about you and what got you into, what made you passionate about that? What is your reason for being in this? I hate to call it a business when it's healthcare, but in this
sure.
field.
Yeah, yeah. So, I mean, I can give you a little snapshot. So, I grew up with two parents that were teachers, and so I was always around what I call the helping profession, right? And mom was a teacher for 40 years, dad was a teacher for 45 years, and like just the level of impact that they had. I mean, there's you name a time from when I was young to when I left Virginia, like going to the grocery store with my parents. It's like seeing all their old students and seeing like, your dad was the best and your mom did this
They
for me.
made
And
a
I was like,
difference in people's lives. They made a
exactly.
difference.
They made a difference in people's lives. And so I always thought, this is cool. Like I can get behind this. I really see the impact just in meeting these people. But there was something in me that was like, I'm not a teacher, right? I don't have any subject that stands out to me. I was like, okay, let's go with this helping, this helping kind of idea here. And, one thing led to the next, and I had a lot of individuals in my life that went down the hole of addiction, specifically at a young age, right? Like one of my childhood best friends was using substances at a very,
Yeah.
very young age. And I remember being, again, you got the mom and dad to helping, and then one of my best friends, and it's like, dude,
Together.
I want everything, and like I want to help you with everything in my body, and there's nothing that I can do about it. And I'm not really good at taking no for an answer. So it was like, this is what I want to do. And so the more that I went to the University of Tennessee to get my bachelor's degree in psychology, and that kind of opened my eyes to like again, like the psych aspect of things. And then really where my draw was and what I wanted to do was be a therapist. And honestly, if you'd asked me younger in my career, I would have said, I don't ever want to be a CEO. I don't ever want to be executive. I want to sit in front of people and do this all day because that's what I believe that I'm good at. And I got my foot in the door with an agency fresh out of undergrad. I didn't have a clue what I was doing. But I loved sitting down in front of people and just chatting, right? And getting to learn their lives. And then, like I've always said, once you get your foot in the door in the behavioral health space, you're going to love it or you're going to think it's crazy, and there is no in between, right? And there are those people that are just like, what did I get myself into? This is nuts. And that's
Yeah.
fine, right? But you're going to learn really quickly. And so I got in and really quickly was like, yeah, these are my people. These are my people. And I'm making a difference. And so one thing led to the next, and I kind of started climbing the ranks. And I've kind of always been fond of maybe just like a leadership mentality, whether that be in sports or whatever. And so I grew through the ranks and got into some director level positions. And I really just kind of used my experience from my entry level positions in order to be a director. And I'm
Yeah.
sure I messed up plenty of times. But I think ultimately was made me pretty effective because I'd done it, right, and I could just say, hey, this is kind of how I did it. Let me hold your hand through that process, and if you mess up, we'll mess up together, and we'll figure out how to fix it. And then one thing led to the next. Like I said, took the turn to the government space, and that really helped me learn treatment from like a macro level, right? I'd never even thought about it. I don't even think I knew it existed for years. And so got my foot in that and was like, wow, this is a really important piece of the functionality of the businesses that I'm in, and helped me understand it from a political climate space and just from a regulatory space. I never had thought about that when I first got in. Um, and then like I said previously, once I got done with that, it was like, listen, I love this experience, but this is not me. I'm not a policy analyst. And then I think through some of my leadership positions, I thought, this is what I want to do. I want to lead people and I want to support people and help grow and develop people. And you name where they're at in the kind of the org chart or chain of command. And I think that I'm going to be an effective leader at doing that. So they bought into me. They kind of threw me they threw me the pitch, and I think we're doing pretty well right now.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think it's a great story, and I go back to your friend who you saw suffering, and your parents who you saw as who you looked up to. I guess my question is that what's been the most rewarding part of making that decision for you? Let's start there. What's been the most rewarding part of getting into this?
Oh man. Yeah, I mean, the whole thing, it's got its days just like any other profession where you're like, how did I get myself into this?
Yeah.
But the whole journey has been uh I mean, really just like I has made a drastic impact. I mean, it's a piece of my identity at this point, right? Whether it be I've got this board in my office that I've kept over the years, and I don't get much of them anymore because I'm at the CEO level. But clients started giving me like cards, and like family members started giving me cards or like like pictures or stuff like that. And I've got this whole big like punch board that I keep up in my office. And like that's where it all started, was like, I can look up at this and like I have visual tangible evidence that I'm
Yeah.
making a difference.
Someone said thank you.
Yeah,
Someone
it's a
said
thank
thank
you,
you.
right? And that's like
That's all you need.
that's all you're in this for, right? And even if you don't get a thank you, that's fine too, right?
Right.
But but to have tangible proof on my wall that I did make a difference, like
Yeah.
that's all. That's why I'm
Yeah.
doing this, you know?
That's something else.
Yeah,
That's great. I love
yeah,
that.
yeah.
What's been the I guess what's been the biggest surprise for you getting into this? Since that day you decided you want to help your friend. What was the biggest thing where you said, "Whoa, I didn't see that coming. I didn't realize it was going to be this crazy." Maybe, or maybe I mean,
Yeah. Oh, there's definitely the days, and I still say all the time, well, I didn't think I was ever going to see that, or I've never seen that before. But that's a whole piece of what I love, right? My
yeah,
job is not monotonous in the
yeah.
slightest, and that's me sitting way away, or way removed from the chaos for the most part. But what's been the biggest eye opener or the biggest surprise? I kind of live in this self-proclaimed, like almost like fantasy land sometimes of like, I think people genuinely have, or genuinely good and genuinely have the right motive and intent in, I'll say, being in this world, being in the
Yep.
addiction space.
Yep.
And unfortunately, that's not how it always is. And
Mm,
that was really eye-opening to me.
yeah.
And has really, it's disheartening that people have to come to treatment, and there may be folks that are not doing this for the right reasons, or
Caregivers,
just don't have.
caregivers in it for the wrong reasons has been the biggest eye opener.
Yeah, yeah, 100%, hundred
That's
percent.
hard to hear. That's hard. And I spent 5 years in healthcare. I worked for a hospital,
Yeah,
and I know what you're talking about. Unfortunately,
exactly.
I know what you're talking about, but
Mhm.
it's a small percentage of a very small percentage. But
Yep.
you don't want any percentage, right? When you're in health,
Exactly.
you don't want
Exactly.
any percentage.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. And again, I can't control other agencies and I can't control other people, but ultimately that's a good piece. Like, we'll throw that back to my three P's, and that's the people piece, right?
Yeah,
I have the ability and I am in the position of hiring and onboarding and training and developing people now to where I can say, you're either doing this for the right reason or you're not going to work for me anymore.
okay.
You know?
So all right. Well, where do you go with this? If you find one of these folks that you go, oh, wait a second, whoa, wait a second,
Yeah.
not here for the right reason. How do you
Yeah.
deal with that from a CEO perspective?
Yeah. I mean, I think it depends, like, what kind of reason are we talking here? But I don't really, and this may sound, I don't mean to sound too assertive, but I've got no time for it. Again, we're talking about treating people with respect and dignity and destigmatizing and dealing with potentially what's the hardest thing they're ever going to deal with in their life. I don't have any time for you to not have, like, to not be in this for the right reasons. There's no space for lack of ethics. There's no space of, like, you got to have morals, you got to have ethics, and you got to have intent behind what you do. And if you don't have that, I'm not, I don't need to be mean to you. But I just don't have time for it. And you're just not in the right place, at least for our agency. You're not
Right.
in the right place. And again, let me brag on my staff for a second. If you come in and you don't have that for some reason, you're gonna get weeded out real quick, because we all do.
Yeah.
You know?
Right. Right. So take quick action is what I'm hearing. It's not
Yeah.
you're not hanging around a long time if you're
You know,
found.
it's a yeah, it's a poison, right? And if I let that linger, that's toxic with everything that I've worked so hard to build at this agency, right? And what I have to think about my agency as a whole. And if I let something like that linger, what does that show to the rest of my team?
Right.
Yeah.
Right. This has been fascinating. I don't want to leave it on sort of a negative issue. I mean, we could talk about rewards and how do you reward good behavior and good in the right things. But maybe that's for part two.
Sure.
I think you've given us a lot to think about in terms of how to run a successful business. I'm stealing shamelessly from your top three themes here. People, process, and performance. I'm going to use that quite a bit in future interviews as well.
Yeah.
But really, I knew this was going to be a great interview, Adam. I'm glad you were on and you accepted this, and let's do this again.
Absolutely. Thanks, Kurt. I appreciate your time, appreciate your expertise, and let's do it again.